Have you ever paused for a second and truly listened to the voice in your head? Not to answer it, not to control it, but simply to notice what it is saying. A stream of thoughts that never stops, at times worrying about the future, at times returning to old memories, at times judging yourself, at times imagining scenarios that have never even happened. But what is more unsettling is this. Are you certain that all of that is really you? Or are they simply things passing through you that you have become so used to that you believe they define who you are? If you are not the one consciously choosing the thoughts that appear in your mind, then why do you believe that you are those thoughts? And if your thoughts are constantly changing, then what within you is the one thing that has never changed? These questions are the first cracks in an illusion you have carried for a very long time, that the voice you hear in your head is your voice. From the perspective of Carl Jung, the human mind is not a unified whole called the self. It is a complex ecosystem where consciousness, the unconscious, the persona, the shadow, and deep archetypes coexist and interact. And the part you call I, the ego, is only a small fragment on the surface. Most of what you hear in your mind does not truly come from you in the way you assume. They are echoes of the past, the voice of society, the rejected parts within the shadow, even deeper patterns emerging from the collective unconscious. And here is what very few people dare to face. If you confuse what is happening in your mind with who you are, you may spend your entire life living inside a story that was never true. This video will not teach you how to stop thinking. It will do something far more unsettling. It will lead you to see through every thought that appears in your mind. And when you truly see that, everything you once believed about yourself will no longer remain the same. Do not miss this moment, because what follows is not only learning how to control the mind, but truly returning to yourself after many years of letting your thoughts unconsciously shape the way you act. Part 1. Recognizing the stream of thought in your mind. Number 1. You do not deliberately create your thoughts. There is something very strange that most of us have never truly noticed. You do not decide the first thought that appears in your mind. You can sit still, doing nothing at all, and yet within a single moment, a thought will arise on its own. It may be an old memory, a worry about the future, or just a random phrase you once heard somewhere. What matters is not its content, but the way it appears, unannounced, uninvited, and entirely outside your conscious control. Try observing this closely, just once. When a thought comes, you can notice it, but you cannot point to the exact moment you created it. You do not sit there and tell yourself, "Now I will think about this." Instead, it is like a breeze passing through an open door. You only realize it once it is already inside the room. This raises a very important question. If you are not the one deliberately creating your thoughts, then why do you believe that those thoughts are you? In the psychology of Carl Jung, the human mind is not a unified whole. It is more like a complex ecosystem where multiple layers coexist and interact. Consciousness, the part you call I, is only a small fragment on the surface. Beneath it lies the unconscious, which holds memories, emotions, images, and experiences you no longer clearly remember or have never fully understood. And it is from these deeper layers that thoughts begin to form. This means that many of the thoughts in your mind do not come from you in the way you assume. They are the result of processes you cannot see. An unprocessed memory can become a vague anxiety. A past experience can turn into a recurring belief. A sentence you once heard from someone can become a familiar voice in your head. All of this operates quietly, and then one day it appears as a thought, and you assume that it is who you are. But if you look more closely, you will see a very simple truth. You cannot control the appearance of a thought, but you can notice that it is appearing, and that moment of noticing is the first sign that you are not it. Because if you were the thought, you would not be able to step outside and see it. You may have experienced a moment like this before. A negative thought arises, "I am not good enough," and instead of immediately believing it, you pause for a moment. You look at it as if it were something separate. And in that moment, however brief, you feel a distance, a small distance, but enough for you to realize, this is just a thought. That is the beginning of change. Not by trying to control your thoughts, not by forcing yourself to think more positively, but simply by recognizing that you are not the source of everything happening in your mind. You are not the one creating that stream. You are the one noticing it. And when you begin to see things this way, something very subtle happens. You no longer feel carried away by your thoughts. Instead, you begin to see them like waves, rising and falling without requiring you to control them. And within that recognition, you begin to separate yourself from what you once believed was you. Number 2, you can observe your own thoughts. If you take a moment to observe your mind, you will notice something very interesting. You do not only think, you also know that you are thinking. When a thought appears, there is a part of you that recognizes it. You can say to yourself, "I am worrying, I am overthinking," or "my mind is starting to race again." And the important question here is, if you can recognize a thought, then who are you in that relationship? Imagine that you are standing by the edge of a river. Thoughts are like the water flowing past, continuous, restless, always changing. But you are not the water. You are the one standing there, watching it flow. You can see it, describe it, even be drawn into it, but you are not it. This distinction may seem small, but it completely transforms the way you understand yourself. In Jung's view, consciousness is not only the place where thoughts occur, but also the place where awareness exists. And that awareness is the key. When you recognize a thought, you are standing in a different position from it. You are no longer dissolved into it. You are seeing it from the outside, even if only for a brief moment. This explains why sometimes you can catch yourself in the middle of a thought. You are worrying about something, and suddenly you realize, "I am worrying too much." That moment is like stepping out of the current and looking back at it. And instantly, the intensity of the emotion changes. The thought is still there, but it no longer consumes you completely. This capacity to observe is not something distant or rare. It is always available to you. Most of the time, you simply do not use it. You are so used to being inside your thoughts that you forget you can step outside of them. You are so accustomed to identifying with them that you do not notice the small but very real space between you and what is happening in your mind. And that space is where all freedom begins. When you observe a thought, you do not need to change it. You do not need to fight it. You only need to see it. And in that simple act, you have already done something profound. You stop treating it as yourself. You allow it to exist. but you do not let it define you. According to Jung, the path of psychological development is not about eliminating the unconscious, but about becoming more conscious of it. This means you do not need to make thoughts disappear. You only need to learn to see them more clearly. And when you do, you begin to realize that thoughts are only one part of your experience, not the entirety of who you are. At first, this may happen only in very brief moments. You notice a thought, then get pulled back into the next stream. But gradually, as you practice observing, that distance becomes clearer. You begin to see more, understand more, and most importantly, you are no longer completely controlled by what is happening in your mind. And then, a very deep shift occurs. You are no longer the one being led by your thoughts. You become the one who sees through the very thoughts that have long shaped and guided your actions. Perhaps even now, as you are reading this, you are noticing something familiar within yourself. A thought has just appeared, and for a moment, you see it instead of being carried away by it as usual. If you have ever experienced that brief moment, try sharing below a time when you caught your own thinking. It does not need to be correct. It does not need to be perfect. It only needs to be honest. Sometimes, simply naming such a moment not only helps you see more clearly, but also helps others realize that they are not alone in this experience. Number 3. Thoughts constantly change, but you remain. If you look back on a single day of your life, you will see that your thoughts are constantly changing. In the morning, you may feel full of motivation. By noon, you begin to doubt yourself. In the evening, you fall into a completely different stream of thinking, nothing like what came before. The content in your mind is always shifting, like a sky where the clouds are endlessly changing shape. But there is one thing that does not change, the sense that I am still here. No matter what your thoughts are, no matter how your emotions shift, there is a very basic awareness that you exist. You know that you are experiencing. You know that you are present in that moment. And this happens in a steady way, independent of whatever thoughts are passing through. Consider this. If you were your thoughts, then when your thoughts change, you would have to change with them. But that is not what happens. Thoughts come and go, yet you remain the one who experiences them. You may have a negative thought, and a few minutes later, a positive one. But you do not disappear when the first thought ends. You are still there, continuous, uninterrupted. In Jungian psychology, this relates to the concept of the self, the deepest center of the psyche. The self is not a thought, not an emotion, but the ground in which all experience takes place. It is like the sky, while thoughts are the clouds. Clouds may change, disappear, gather densely, or dissolve, but the sky is always there. When you begin to see this, an important reversal takes place. Before, you may have believed that thoughts were the center, and you were the one being carried along by them. Now, you begin to see that you are the center, and thoughts are simply things that appear within your space. This is not just an idea. It is something you can directly experience. In quiet moments, when you are not caught in thought, you still feel your own presence. You do not need to think anything. You do not need to analyze anything, and yet you are still there. And that feeling is very different from the constant stream of thought. It is quieter, wider, and more stable. And within that stability, you begin to realize something you may never have clearly seen before. You are not what is constantly changing in your mind. You are what remains when all of that changes. When you understand this, your relationship with thought begins to shift. You no longer need to cling to thoughts to feel that you exist. You no longer need to control them to feel safe. You know that no matter where your thoughts go, you are still there, unchanged. And that is one of the most important realizations in the journey of understanding yourself. You are not the ever-changing stream of thought, but the quiet presence behind it. If these ideas remain only at the level of theory, they may sound reasonable, yet still feel abstract. You may understand them, but not truly experience them. And that is why, sometimes, we need to look at a concrete experience, a real person, to see how this unfolds in life. Because there are realizations that only become clear when they are lived. Part 2. Thomas's story. At this point, I am reminded of a friend from my high school days named Thomas. Thomas is the kind of person who, if you only look from the outside, you would never think he is struggling with anything. He works at a large financial company, accustomed to precise numbers and logical decisions. His life is structured, planned, and almost completely free of chaos. But if you spend enough time around him, you begin to notice something very different. Inside, he has never truly been quiet. The stream of thoughts in his mind is always active, constantly analyzing, evaluating, predicting, and judging. It keeps him sharp, but it also exhausts him. At first, Thomas did not see this as a problem. He believed it was his strength, the reason he performed better than others. But over time, he began to realize that he could not turn it off, even when it was no longer necessary. A small conversation could be replayed and analyzed for hours. A vague glance was enough for him to construct a chain of assumptions. At night, when everything outside grew still, the noise within him only became louder. It was this accumulated exhaustion that led him to seek therapy, not because of a clear crisis, but because he began to question whether he was being controlled by his own thoughts. The therapy room was on a high floor of an old building, just far enough from the noise of the city. The space was simple, the light soft, enough to make one slow down. The first sessions were familiar. Thomas spoke, a lot, clearly, logically. He described his thoughts the way one would describe a system in need of repair. But the therapist did not rush to offer solutions. He listened and only occasionally asked a short question, as if not to solve the problem, but to help Thomas reconsider the way he understood himself. One of those questions changed the entire direction of the process. As Thomas was talking about how he could not stop thinking, the therapist asked, "When you notice that you are thinking, which part of you is noticing it?" The question sounded simple, but it made Thomas pause. For the first time, he did not continue his usual line of analysis, but turned back to observe his own experience. He began to realize that there was a part of him not caught in the stream of thought, a part that simply saw it. From that point on, the sessions were no longer about how to stop thinking, but about recognizing thoughts. Thomas started paying attention to how thoughts appeared. Many of them arose suddenly, without clear intention. There were familiar voices repeating themselves, the voice of judgment, the voice of anxiety, the voice pushing him toward perfection. As he went deeper, he realized that these voices were not entirely new. They carried traces of past experiences, imposed standards, unnamed fears. Through the lens of Carl Jung, these were expressions of the shadow and deeper patterns operating within the unconscious. What mattered was that the therapist did not ask Thomas to eliminate them. He simply helped him see more clearly. Thoughts are not a unified entity called I, but contents passing through the mind. And if they can be observed, then they are not the essence of the one who observes. This realization did not come as a logical conclusion, but gradually, through experience. Thomas began to see how thoughts changed with time, with emotion. At one moment, he believed something with certainty, and a few hours later, it was completely different. If that was the case, then what in him did not change? That question did not confuse him. It calmed him. He began to notice a subtle anchor. The sense of being present was always there, even as thoughts shifted. And from there, a clearer distance emerged. He still had thoughts, but he was no longer carried away by them as before. He could notice a worry without immediately believing it. He could see a judgment without needing to react to it. In one of the final sessions of that initial phase of therapy, Thomas said something very simple. "I still think the same way, but I no longer believe that it is me." This was not a denial of thought, but a separation from it. And at that point, what had once been only an idea began to become a real experience. The stream of thought in his mind had never been who he was. If we place this story within the core of Jung's ideas, this is the moment when the ego stops identifying with the contents of the unconscious and opens to a deeper connection with the self. But in simpler terms, Thomas stopped confusing what is happening in his mind with who he is. And perhaps, as you listen to this story, you begin to notice something similar in yourself. The mental chatter in your mind may be loud, convincing, even familiar, but that does not mean it is you. Like Thomas, what you may need is not better control, but clearer seeing. Because when you begin to see, you also begin to separate. And from there, a new space opens, a space where you are no longer defined by your thoughts, but begin to live from a deeper, quieter part within yourself. Thomas's story does not end with the realization that he is not his thoughts. What matters more is this. As he continued to observe long enough, a natural question arose. If those thoughts are not me, then where do they actually come from? And that question opens another door, a deeper one, where you begin to see the true structure behind mental chatter. Part 3. Decoding. Where do the thoughts in your mind really come from? At a certain point, simply realizing that you are not the stream of thoughts in your mind is no longer enough. Because the moment you begin to separate yourself from them, a deeper question naturally arises. If those thoughts are not me, then where do they actually come from? Why are there certain thoughts that repeat with such familiarity that you almost believe they are your nature? And why do some thoughts appear at the wrong time in the wrong context, yet carry a very real weight? From the perspective of Carl Jung, what you hear in your mind is not a random flow, but the result of multiple layers of psychological structure operating at the same time. And to truly understand yourself, you cannot stop at observing thoughts. You need to begin tracing them back, because only when you see their origin can you understand why they hold such influence, and more importantly, why they were never truly you. Number 1. Your thoughts are echoes of the past. There is something very few people realize. Most of what you call present thoughts does not actually belong to the present. It is like an old recording being played again in a new situation where the details may have changed, but the emotion remains almost intact. You may find yourself in a completely ordinary moment, a conversation, a passing glance, a brief silence, yet your mind reacts as if it is facing something familiar from long ago. And in that moment, mental chatter begins to speak. Imagine you receive a message, but the other person replies more slowly than usual. A thought appears almost immediately. Did I do something wrong? On the surface, this seems like a simple thought. But if you look deeper, it is not simple at all. It carries a familiar feeling, the feeling of being ignored, abandoned, or not important enough. And what is worth noticing is this: that feeling usually does not begin in the present. It has existed before in another situation, with another person. But your unconscious has held on to it, like a trace that was never fully processed. Carl Jung called the place where these traces are stored the personal unconscious, a deeper layer of the mind that contains all the experiences you have gone through but never fully understood or released. These may be memories you have forgotten, emotions you once suppressed, or moments you were not able to face at the time. But forgetting does not mean they have disappeared. They have simply moved to a deeper layer, where they continue to exist and wait for an opportunity to return. And the way they return is rarely loud. They do not appear as clear memories. Instead, they emerge as thoughts, a passing sentence, a vague discomfort with no obvious cause, an anxiety that feels disproportionate to the situation. You think you are reacting to the present, but in reality, you are responding to something that happened long ago. Jung once said, "The unconscious is not just a repository of forgotten experiences, it is a living system that continues to influence our present." This means the unconscious is not a static storage. It is a living system, constantly operating and seeking expression. And mental chatter is one of its clearest expressions. Look at the thoughts that repeat in your mind. Phrases like, "I am not good enough," "I will fail," "Others will not understand me." These thoughts rarely appear randomly. They often have a history. You may have heard something similar before. You may have lived through a situation that made you feel that way. And even though you have moved on, even though your life has changed, a part of you still holds on to that conclusion. Not because it is true, but because it has never been consciously revisited. What makes mental chatter powerful is not its content, but the familiarity that comes with it. When a thought appears carrying a feeling you have experienced before, your mind tends to believe it is true, not because you have verified it, but because you have felt it before. And that familiarity creates the illusion that it is part of you. But if you pause and observe more carefully, you will see something different. These thoughts do not truly belong to the present moment. They are like echoes, not the original sound, but the residue of something that once occurred. And like any echo, it exists only because there is a surface for it to reflect on. In this case, that surface is your attention. When you do not recognize this, you continue to live as if every thought is a direct response to the present. But when you begin to see their origin, a subtle distance appears. You no longer see thoughts as absolute truth. You begin to see them as traces, as clues, as doorways leading back to the past. And in that small shift, you begin to regain agency. Because when you understand that you are not thinking, but rehearing, you are no longer carried away by every stream of thought. You begin to ask, does this truly belong to the present? Or is it just a part of me trying to be heard? And sometimes, that question alone is enough to step out of the current you once believed was yourself. As you begin to see that some thoughts do not truly belong to the present, you may also start to recognize certain familiar phrases that have been repeating in your mind for a long time. If you are willing, try leaving one such thought in the comments, not to analyze it, but simply to see it clearly once more. Sometimes, bringing a thought into the light is already the beginning of separating from it. And perhaps within those shared reflections, you may see a piece of yourself through someone else's story. But not all thoughts come from your personal past. There are voices in your mind that do not carry the emotion of memory, but the structure of a standard. They do not simply repeat what has happened. They continuously push you to become a certain version of yourself. And when you look more closely, you will realize these thoughts are not formed from within, but learned from the outside, and gradually become a familiar voice within you. Number 2. Your thoughts are the voice of society. There is a type of thought so familiar that almost everyone has heard it in their mind, yet rarely questions where it comes from. Thoughts like, I have to do better, do not disappoint others, I am not allowed to make mistakes, or simply, what will others think of me? These thoughts often appear with a tone that feels certain, familiar, and convincing enough that you easily believe they are your own voice. But if you pause and look deeper, you will notice something subtle. These thoughts are not truly born from within you. They are formed from the outside, and over time they seep inward until they feel like part of who you are. Carl Jung called this psychological structure the persona, the mask each person wears when entering society. The persona is not something negative. It is how you learn to adapt, to be accepted, to survive in a world full of expectations and rules. As a child, you learn that when you do something right, you are praised. When you make a mistake, you are corrected. When you behave in ways others expect, you are loved. And gradually, you do not just act according to those standards, you begin to think according to them. What is important is that this process happens quietly. No one explicitly tells you, turn other people's expectations into the voice inside your head. And yet, over time, it happens. A sentence from your parents, a glance from a teacher, a comment from a friend, all of it leaves traces. And those traces do not disappear. They are stored, repeated, and eventually become part of the stream of thoughts you hear every day. Think of a familiar situation. You are doing something, and suddenly a thought appears. This is not good enough. You do not know exactly where it comes from, but it feels authoritative. You immediately adjust your behavior, try harder, feel more pressure. But if you pause and ask, who is saying this? You may not find a clear answer, because that voice no longer has the shape of a specific person. It has been internalized, becoming part of you, or at least something you believe is you. Jung described this clearly when he said, the persona is that which in reality one is not, but which oneself as well as others think one is. The persona is not your true self, but the image you learn to become in order to fit into the world. And what is worth reflecting on is this. When the persona becomes too strong, you do not just live through it, you begin to hear it from within, as if it were your true voice. This explains why many thoughts in your mind carry a sense of must. Must be better, must be smarter, must be right, must be recognized. These thoughts do not come from your natural essence, but from absorbed standards. They are like invisible rules you carry with you, even when no one is there to impose them anymore. And because you have heard them for so long, you no longer recognize that they once came from the outside. In simple terms, you can think of the persona as a voice recorded from your environment and replayed within you. At first, it was someone else's voice. But over time, you became so used to it that you assumed it was your own. And this is where the confusion begins. You do not just hear the thought, you believe you are its source. But when you look deeper, you will notice something important. Thoughts that carry judgment, pressure, or comparison tend to share one quality. They always pull your attention outward. They make you concerned with how you appear in the eyes of others, whether you are good enough by some standard. Meanwhile, the moments when you are truly yourself, when you act from something natural without needing to prove anything, are often very quiet, with very little internal dialogue. This difference shows that not all thoughts come from the same place. Some are natural responses to life. Others are repetitions of what you have learned in order to become acceptable. And when you cannot distinguish between the two, it becomes easy to lose connection with who you truly are. Recognizing the role of the persona does not mean you need to eliminate it. You still need it to function in society. What matters is that you are no longer unconsciously controlled by it. You begin to notice when a thought appears just to help you be accepted, and when an action truly comes from within. And in that distinction, you gradually regain your agency. Because when you see that much of what you once believed was you is actually borrowed voices, you begin to ask, if not those voices, then who am I? And that question does not lead you into confusion. Instead, it opens a door, one where you begin to rediscover something quieter, more authentic, and free from the need to prove itself to anyone. But if the persona is what you learn to present outwardly, there is still another part, completely opposite, that you have learned to hide. Everything that does not fit the image you want to become, everything you were taught is not acceptable, does not disappear. It simply moves deeper, and from there, it begins to appear not as behavior, but as thought. Number 3, negative thoughts are the rejected parts. There is a kind of thought you are probably more familiar with than you realize. It does not arrive loudly, not as a shout, but often begins very quietly. I am not good enough. I will fail anyway. Others are probably judging me. What makes these thoughts distinct is not only their content, but the feeling that comes with them, a feeling so real, so close, as if it touches something deep within you. And because of that, you do not just hear them, you believe them. But from Carl Jung's perspective, these thoughts are not truths about you. They are the voice of a part of you that you have learned to turn away from a long time ago. Jung called this part the shadow. It is not an abstract or merely symbolic idea, but a very concrete psychological reality. The shadow is everything you do not want to admit about yourself. Every emotion, desire, impulse, and even potential that you were taught you should not have. As a child, you may have learned that anger is bad, that jealousy is selfish, that vulnerability is shameful. And in order to be accepted, you began to push those parts down, out of your awareness. You did not eliminate them, you simply stopped looking at them. But what Jung emphasized is this: what is pushed down does not disappear. It only changes the way it exists. It no longer shows up as clear behavior, but transforms into more subtle forms, and one of the most common forms is thought. Repetitive negative thoughts are not a sign that you are broken, but a sign that there are parts of you that have been neglected, trying to be seen. One does not become enlightened by imagining figures of light, but by making the darkness conscious. Jung did not say you must eliminate the darkness, but that you must become aware of it. Imagine the shadow as a room you locked a long time ago. You no longer enter it, and you do not want to remember that it exists. But the room is still there, and inside it, everything is still happening. No light reaches it, but that does not mean it is empty. And the more tightly you keep the door shut, the more what is inside finds ways to leak out through the smallest cracks. A negative thought, a vague unease, an exaggerated reaction, all of these can be such cracks. You may have experienced this without realizing it. A friend becomes more successful than you, and you feel discomfort, but immediately you tell yourself, "I should not feel this way." You push the feeling away, but a few hours later, thoughts appear. "They were just lucky," or "I will never achieve that." These thoughts do not arise randomly. They are how the shadow speaks after you refuse to hear it in its original form. What you call negative thinking is often a transformed expression of emotions that have not been accepted. What makes the shadow powerful is not its nature, but your denial of it. When you do not acknowledge a part of yourself, it does not disappear. It becomes more unconscious and therefore more powerful. It is no longer examined by awareness, no longer questioned, but operates quietly in the background. And when it appears as thought, you easily take it as truth because you no longer recognize where it comes from. One of the great paradoxes Jung pointed out is this: the more you try to become good, the more you are likely to be driven by the shadow. When you build an image of yourself as positive, kind, always in control, you unintentionally push everything that does not fit that image into the dark. And those parts, when not allowed to exist in a healthy way, return in distorted forms as self-criticism, irrational fears, or unease with no clear cause. So the issue is not whether you have negative thoughts. The issue is how you relate to them. If you treat them as enemies, you will keep pushing them deeper. But if you begin to see them as signals, messages from parts of you that have been ignored, everything changes. Instead of asking, "How do I stop this thought?" you begin to ask, "What part of me is trying to speak through this thought?" And that question opens a completely different path. When you approach thoughts this way, you are no longer trapped in their content. You are no longer arguing with them, trying to prove them right or wrong. You begin to see through them, like looking through fog to notice the landscape behind it. And behind every negative thought, there is often a very real feeling, a fear, a wound, or an unmet need. Jung did not see the shadow as something to eliminate, but something to integrate. This means you do not try to become a perfect version of yourself without darkness. You learn to accept that you have many sides. When you allow the rejected parts to exist within your awareness, they no longer need to shout through thoughts. They become quieter, clearer, and eventually they become part of your wholeness instead of a source of conflict. And perhaps When you look back at the negative thoughts you once feared, you will begin to see them differently. Not as proof that something is wrong with you, but as a sign that something within you is waiting to be understood. Not an enemy to eliminate, but a part of a story you have never fully told. And when you begin to listen instead of resist, you will notice something subtle. The thoughts that once frightened you were only trying to guide you back to the parts of yourself you left behind. However, even the shadow is not the deepest layer, because there are thoughts that, if you are honest, you cannot trace back to any specific personal experience. They are deeper than memory, wider than the individual, and sometimes carry a strange sense of familiarity you cannot explain. And that is where you begin to touch another layer of the mind, one that is not only your story, but the story of humanity itself. Number 4. Thoughts come from collective archetypes. There are thoughts that arise in your mind that, if you look honestly, you cannot determine where they began. They are not tied to a specific memory, not rooted in a clear experience, nor something you directly learned from your family or environment. Yet they are there, very real, very powerful, and sometimes carrying a strange familiarity, as if you have known them for a very long time. For example, the fear of being abandoned, the feeling that you must become good enough to be loved, or a vague longing that your life must hold a greater meaning than what is currently happening. These thoughts are not merely personal, they go deeper than that. And according to Carl Jung, they belong to another layer of the psyche called the collective unconscious. Jung believed that beneath the personal unconscious, where individual memories are stored, there exists a deeper layer where human beings share common psychological structures. He called these structures archetypes. They are not specific images, but patterns of emotion and experience that have existed within humanity for a very long time, passed down across generations. They are like invisible scripts the mind uses to understand the world and itself. And importantly, you do not learn them in the usual way, you are born with them. Consider a simple example. There are moments when you feel the need to prove your worth, even when no one is asking you to. You feel pressure to achieve something, to succeed, to be recognized. If you ask why, you may not find a clear cause. Yet the feeling is real. According to Jung, this may be the operation of the hero archetype, the pattern that drives one to overcome challenges and affirm their value. Similarly, when you feel fear of abandonment or a need for connection, this may be the voice of the child archetype, seeking safety and belonging. These thoughts are not products of a single personal experience, but expressions of deeper structures present in all of us. This explains why sometimes you experience powerful thoughts that do not seem to match your current situation. You may be in a stable relationship, yet still feel afraid of being left. You may have achieved a great deal, yet still feel insufficient. These thoughts do not always reflect reality. They reflect deeper patterns operating within you. They do not ask for your agreement. They simply appear as part of the psychological structure you carry. Jung once wrote, "The collective unconscious contains the whole spiritual heritage of mankind's evolution, born anew in the brain structure of every individual." This perspective changes the way you understand thought. It suggests that your mind is not only shaped by your life, but by a much longer psychological history. What you think, feel, and imagine is sometimes not just your story, but part of a larger human story. Seen this way, mental chatter is no longer entirely personal. It becomes a meeting point where your individual experiences intersect with universal patterns. A thought may begin from a personal feeling, but be amplified by a deeper archetype. And because of that, it can feel intense, difficult to explain, and sometimes beyond your control. But the point is not to eliminate these thoughts. Jung never encouraged suppressing the unconscious. Instead, he emphasized recognizing and understanding it. When you begin to see that some of your thoughts are not only yours, but expressions of deeper archetypes, a new distance appears. You are no longer fully absorbed in their content. You begin to see the structure behind them. For example, when a thought appears, "I must prove my worth," instead of immediately believing it, you might recognize this could be the hero archetype at work. And in that moment, the thought loses some of its power, not because it disappears, but because you no longer fully identify with it. You see it as an expression, not your essence. This does not distance you from yourself. It brings you closer. You begin to understand that your mind is not a random stream, but a structured system with depth and history. And within that system, you are not only the one experiencing, but also the one who can recognize what is happening. When you look deeply enough, you begin to see that many thoughts in your mind are not a personal voice, but a shared echo, sounds that have existed for a long time, simply passing through you in a moment of time. And if they are only passing through, then perhaps they were never truly you. But what makes this entire system alive is not only the origin of thoughts, but how they function to maintain balance. Not all thoughts are memories, patterns, or social voices. Some thoughts appear simply because a part of you is out of balance, and the mind is trying to bring you back. Number 5. Thoughts as the mind's way of compensating for inner imbalance. There are times when your mind becomes unusually noisy, not because you have too much to do, nor because there is a clear problem, but simply because inside you, a stream of thoughts begins to move without rest. It may be imagined scenarios, internal dialogues, repetitive worries, or even thoughts that contradict how you usually see yourself. What unsettles you is not just their content, but the sense that your mind is operating in a direction you do not control. And you begin to ask, why am I thinking this way? According to Carl Jung, what is happening is not random, nor is it a sign of a broken mind. It is a natural mechanism he calls compensation. Jung believed that the psyche constantly seeks balance. When one aspect of your conscious life becomes too one-sided, neglected, or suppressed, the unconscious produces opposing content to restore equilibrium. And one of the clearest ways it does this is through thought. Imagine you are someone who always tries to stay in control. You plan carefully, think logically, and suppress emotions to avoid unnecessary risks. On the surface, you appear stable and rational, but at some point, you notice thoughts arising that are completely opposite, impulsive ideas, irrational scenarios, or even an urge to disrupt everything you have built. This can feel frightening or confusing, as if something in you is going wrong. But according to Jung, this is not dysfunctional. It is a signal. When you lean too far in one direction, for example, toward excessive rationality, the unconscious generates emotional content to compensate. When you try to be strong and never allow vulnerability, your mind may produce thoughts of fear, hurt, or the very things you try to avoid, not because you are weak, but because a part of you has been left out. and thought becomes the only way that part can be expressed. Jung once said, "The unconscious compensates for the one-sidedness of consciousness." This points to a deep truth. Your mind is not working against you. It is trying to help you. But the way it does so is not always comfortable. Sometimes it brings thoughts that are difficult to understand or accept. But if you look deeper, you will see they are not there to harm you, but to restore balance. Consider another example. Someone who always tries to be a good person, always kind, always prioritizing others. Consciously, they believe this is the right way to live. But over time, thoughts begin to appear that they do not want to admit. Irritation, resentment, even selfish fantasies. They may feel guilty and try to push these thoughts away. But the more they suppress them, the more they return. Why? Because the selfish part of them has never been allowed to exist. And thought becomes the only path through which it can emerge. In this case, mental chatter is not the problem. It is a signal of imbalance. Conscious life has leaned too heavily toward one identity, the good person, leaving no space for other parts. And the unconscious in its own way is trying to correct that. What matters is this: if you only look at the surface of thoughts, they may seem chaotic, irrational, even disturbing. But if you see them as a kind of language of the unconscious, you begin to notice an underlying logic. Each thought is not random. It is a response, an adjustment, an attempt to bring you back toward wholeness. This is where many people get stuck. They try to control their thoughts, replace bad thoughts with good ones, without realizing they are missing the message beneath. It is like turning off a warning light on a dashboard without addressing what caused it to turn on. You may silence it temporarily, but the underlying issue remains. Jung did not encourage that kind of control. He encouraged listening, not to believe every thought, but to understand what it is trying to communicate. Because once you understand, repetition is no longer necessary. And perhaps one of the most important shifts you can experience is when you begin to see mental chatter not as an enemy, but as a messenger. A messenger that sometimes brings uncomfortable news, but is pointing you towards something you have not yet seen. When you approach thoughts this way, something subtle changes. You are no longer carried away by them, but you are also no longer resisting them. You stand in a different place, close enough to understand, yet far enough not to identify. And in that place, you begin to see yourself more clearly, not through what you think, but through what your thoughts are trying to balance within you. When you look deeply enough into the origin of thought, something becomes clear. The problem is not that thoughts exist, but that you have been standing in the wrong position in relation to them for a very long time. And once that is seen, the question is no longer, "Why am I thinking this way?" but becomes, "Can I live without being led by these thoughts?" Part 4. Transformation. How to stop identifying with the constant stream of thoughts in your mind. Before moving into any practice, there is something very simple yet often overlooked that you need to recognize. The problem is not that you have too many thoughts, but where you are positioned in relation to those thoughts. When a thought appears, you are used to immediately merging with it, believing it, and letting it guide your emotions and actions. Over time, you no longer see the boundary between what is happening in your mind and who you are. This silent identification is what gives thoughts their power, not because they are inherently powerful, but because you have unknowingly handed them authority. So transformation does not begin by making the mind silent. It begins by shifting your position, from being carried by thoughts to being the one who can see them. Once that position changes, the practices that follow are no longer efforts to fight thoughts, but ways of returning to your proper place within your own inner experience. First practice: stop calling every thought I, and begin to recognize it as a part of me. This is a small shift in language, but it forms the foundation of the entire process of separating yourself from thought. Previously, when a thought appeared, you would unconsciously identify with it. I am anxious. I am not good enough. I am failing. This way of speaking dissolves you completely into the content of the thought, leaving no space to observe or choose. But when you change how you name the experience, from I to a part of me, a subtle shift begins. A part of me is anxious. A part of me thinks I am not good enough. You are no longer the entirety of that thought. You become the one recognizing it. From Jung's perspective, this is the first step where the ego stops identifying with unconscious content and begins to see the inner structure of the psyche. This difference is not just linguistic. It changes how you experience reality. Imagine a simple situation. Someone does not reply to your message. A thought appears. They are ignoring me. I must have done something wrong. If you identify with it, you immediately believe it and react emotionally. But if you pause and recognize, a part of me is thinking they are ignoring me, you create a small but decisive distance. The thought is no longer absolute truth. It is just one possibility arising within you. And within that space, you begin to see that there are many parts within you, each with its own voice, emotion, and need. No single part represents your whole being. This practice does not require analysis or change. It only requires consistent recognition. Whenever a strong thought appears, pause for a few seconds and name it. A part of me is nothing more. Over time, you begin to see a fundamental truth. You are not what is happening in your mind. You are the one who sees it. And from that separation, real transformation begins. Second, let go of the need to control or immediately resolve every thought as it appears. This step is much more difficult because it touches a deep psychological mechanism, the need to understand in order to feel safe. When a thought arises, especially uncomfortable ones like anxiety or doubt, your automatic response is to intervene. You want to analyze it, explain it, find its cause, and reach a conclusion as quickly as possible, as if clarity will remove discomfort. But this reflex is exactly what keeps you inside the stream of thought. Every attempt to solve it is another way of engaging with it. From Jung's view, this is the ego trying to maintain the illusion of control. The ego wants everything to be clear, logical, predictable. But the inner world does not operate that way. The unconscious communicates through images, feelings, symbols, and unnamed impulses. When you force thoughts to be immediately understood, you impose rigidity on something inherently fluid and deep. Consider a familiar situation. A thought appears. I may have done something wrong. You immediately begin tracing it. Where, when, with whom, what will happen next? Each answer leads to another question, and you get caught in an endless loop. But if you pause and do nothing, simply allowing the thought to exist, you begin to see something different. The thought changes on its own. It weakens, shifts, or fades, The practice here is not to stop thinking, but to stop reacting with the need to fix thinking. When a thought appears, pause and do nothing. No analysis, no argument, no suppression. Just let it be, like a cloud passing through the sky. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The mind will try to pull you back into old patterns. But if you remain in non-interference long enough, you begin to realize you do not need to control thoughts in order not to be controlled by them. At that point, something shifts. You move from "a thought appears to I must deal with it" to the ability to remain with uncertainty without being carried away. This marks a movement beyond the controlling ego toward a deeper center, where stability does not come from understanding everything, but from no longer needing immediate understanding to feel safe. Third, bring thoughts out of your mind to see their true structure. This is where you begin to make the unconscious conscious in a more concrete way. When thoughts remain in the mind, they feel large, vague, and convincing. Without form, they easily expand, repeat, and appear as truth. But when you bring them outside, by writing them down, speaking them, or reading them, something changes. They are no longer something that surrounds you. They become something you can observe. From Jung's perspective, this is the process of bringing unconscious content into awareness. Once seen clearly, it no longer operates in the dark with the same power. You begin to notice patterns, repetition, distortion, exaggeration, assumptions. For example, a thought like, "I always ruin everything." In your mind, it feels undeniable. But when written down, you can see it differently. What does always mean? What is everything? Is this actually true? You are not rejecting the thought. You are seeing it from the outside. The practice is simple. When a strong or repetitive thought appears, take a few minutes to write it down exactly as it is. Then read it as if it belongs to someone else. The goal is not deep analysis, but distance. Over time, this builds an important capacity. You are no longer deceived by how real thoughts feel. You begin to see that many thoughts are combinations of memory, emotion, and assumption, not accurate reflections of reality. And through direct experience, not theory, you stop identifying with them. Fourth, trace thoughts back to see they do not truly originate from you. Once you can observe thoughts without immediately reacting, the next step is to go deeper. Not just, what is this thought, but where does it come from? A thought rarely appears randomly. It carries a familiar tone, feeling, and pattern. For example, "I am not good enough." If you look closely, this is not new. It may echo a past experience, a judgment you once heard, a repeated feeling of comparison. The thought is not born in the present moment. It is activated by it. At a deeper level, some thoughts reflect broader patterns: fear of abandonment, the need to prove yourself, perfectionism, self-criticism. These are not only personal, they reflect deeper psychological structures Jung described as archetypes. The practice here is not complex analysis, but asking the right questions. When a strong thought appears, pause and ask, "Does this voice feel familiar? When have I felt this before? Is this truly about now or something old returning?" You do not need perfect answers. The act of tracing already creates separation. For example, someone receives mild feedback and thinks, "I am being judged." If they follow the thought, anxiety grows. But if they trace it, they may realize this feeling has existed since childhood, where criticism meant not good enough. The thought becomes not a present reality, but a past pattern being reactivated. At that moment, a deeper distance forms. You no longer say, "This is me," but "This is a part shaped over time." The thought does not disappear, but your relationship to it changes. You are no longer bound by it. Fifth, act from inner clarity instead of following thoughts. This is the most important shift. It is no longer about understanding thoughts, but about not letting them dictate how you live. Previously, the pattern was simple. A thought appears, you act on it. Do not speak, you will be judged, and you stay silent. Thoughts become the guide, and you follow. But as you go deeper, you begin to see that thoughts are not commands. They are suggestions. They may come from the past, from the shadow, from deeper patterns. If you continue acting based on them, you remain in the same cycles. From Jung's perspective, this is where individuation truly begins. As the ego loosens its identification, a deeper center, the self, emerges. Unlike thought, the self is quiet, not forceful. It appears as a calm sense of what is true, what is aligned, what is authentic. So the practice is not to oppose thought, but to not let it decide. When a thought appears, especially one that holds you back, pause and ask, if I were not led by this thought, what would I choose? This shifts your attention from the thought to a deeper place within you. For example, you want to speak in a meeting, but a thought says, "Do not, you will be judged." Before, you would stay silent. Now, you still hear the thought, but you check within. Is what I want to say true, necessary? If yes, you speak anyway. The difference is this: you are no longer acting to avoid discomfort, but from inner clarity. This does not mean fear disappears. You may still feel anxious or uncertain, but those feelings no longer determine your actions. You begin to live by a different principle, not "what do I think?" but "what is true for me?" Over time, a profound shift happens. You are no longer pulled by thoughts. You can see them, hear them, but not be bound by them. A different kind of freedom emerges, not freedom from thought, but freedom from being defined and controlled by it. And this is where transformation completes. You do not need to silence the mind, because you no longer live inside it. You live from a deeper center, where action is no longer reaction, but conscious choice. After practicing long enough, something subtle becomes clear. Separating from thought is no longer an effort. It is no longer something you do, but a natural state. And at that point, the journey is no longer about managing the mind. It becomes something much deeper, the process of returning to yourself. Part 5. Conclusion. Individuation. When you are no longer your thoughts, but yourself. There is a very quiet moment on the inner journey that not everyone notices. It does not arrive as a clear breakthrough, nor as a moment when you suddenly figure something out. In fact, it comes when you no longer feel the need to understand. When you stop returning to your mind every time life unfolds, stop needing to interpret, analyze, or label every experience as it happens. The stream of thought is still there. It still appears, still familiar, sometimes just as noisy as before. But something has changed. You are no longer living at its center. It becomes like the distant hum of a city, still present, but no longer filling your entire space. And within that quiet, something very different begins to emerge. You are no longer the one thinking about life, but the one actually living it. This is what Carl Jung called individuation. Not becoming a better version of yourself, but gradually withdrawing false identifications to return to a more authentic center. In simpler terms, it is when you no longer need to search for yourself within your thoughts. You begin to realize you were never there. Before, you may have spent a great deal of time observing thoughts, distancing yourself from them, reminding yourself that this is just a thought. But all of that still required effort, and as long as there is effort, you are still at the edge. Individuation begins somewhere else, when you no longer need to do that at all. Not because you forget, but because you are no longer pulled in from the beginning. It is like learning to swim. At first you think about every movement, every breath, every adjustment, but at some point, you no longer think about swimming. You are in the water, and your body knows what to do. There is no tension of control, no effort to do it right. There is only a natural state. You are swimming. The same is true with thought. As long as you keep reminding yourself, do not believe the thought, you are still very close to it. But when you begin to live without reacting to every thought that appears, you have moved beyond it. Not by defeating it, but by no longer participating in it. One of the clearest signs of this state is a kind of inner simplicity. You are no longer caught in familiar loops. Am I right? Who should I be? What will others think? Not because you have become indifferent, but because you no longer need those questions to confirm your existence. You begin to act from a very different place, one that does not require constant explanation, yet feels clear. You will notice this in ordinary moments. A conversation, a decision, a moment that calls for response. Before, you would think a lot before speaking or acting. You would analyze, weigh, and sometimes miss the moment entirely. Now, the familiar thoughts may still appear, but they are no longer decisive. You do not resist them, and you do not follow them. You simply do not let them lead. And then you notice something unexpected. When you are no longer led by thought, you become clearer than ever. This does not mean anxiety or doubt disappears. They still arise, but they no longer take over your entire experience. They become just one part of it, not the whole. Like standing by a river, you still see the current, but you are no longer swept away. And in that distance, a different kind of freedom appears. Not freedom from thought, but freedom from being defined by it. This shift is often subtle. It does not come as a dramatic turning point, but builds through small moments. You notice you no longer react immediately. You no longer need to think it through perfectly before expressing what you feel. You are no longer trapped in needing to understand everything before acting. Instead, you begin to trust something deeper, not thought, but your direct experience. Look at an important decision. Before, you would be pulled into questions. What if I am wrong? What will others think? Which choice is best? The more you think, the more confused you become. Now, those questions may still arise, but you are no longer dependent on them. You listen, but you are not bound. And in the end, you choose, not because you are completely certain, but because it feels aligned with who you are in that moment. Jung once said, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." This is not about becoming someone better, but about removing what is not you. And mental chatter, in a way, is the thickest layer of that covering. When you identify with it, you live inside stories constructed by the mind. But when you no longer get caught in it, you begin to see clearly. Many things you believed were truth were only repeated interpretations. Individuation is not the journey of becoming perfect. It is the journey of becoming honest. Honest with what you feel, what you want, and even the parts you once avoided. And to do that, you do not need to eliminate thought. You only need to stop letting it define who you are. At a deeper level, when you are no longer led by inner chatter, your relationship with the world changes. You no longer see others through assumptions already formed in your mind. You begin to see them more clearly, because you are no longer filtered through your own internal narratives. And from there, a different kind of connection appears, less defensive, less judgmental, more real. You could say that when you are no longer your thoughts, you do not become something new. You simply begin to notice a space that was always there, a space where experience can unfold without distortion. You no longer need to control everything to feel safe. You no longer need to understand everything to keep moving. You no longer need to become someone else to feel enough. You simply are yourself. And perhaps that is what many people were searching for all along. Not a state without thought, but a state where thought is no longer the center. Not a perfect version, but a true one. If you look back at the entire journey, you will notice a clear reversal. At the beginning, you believed you needed to control your thoughts to live better. But the further you go, the more you realize, letting go of control is what brings you back. You do not need to silence the mind. You only need to stop living inside it. And when that happens, a door opens, not to somewhere new, but back to yourself. Back to a part of you that has always been there, quiet, steady, untouched by any passing current. From here, the question is no longer, how do I stop thinking? It becomes, how will you live, knowing that you were never those thoughts? And perhaps by now, you are not only understanding these words, but beginning to feel them in your own way. A subtle shift, just enough to see things a little differently. If this journey touches you in that way, stay with it, not out of habit, but as a conscious choice to remain with this process a little longer. Because some changes do not come from hearing once, but from returning again and again, and looking more deeply into yourself. After everything you have just gone through, what matters is not how much more you understand about the mind, but that you begin to question a belief you have carried for so long. That what happens in your head is who you are. When that belief begins to crack, a strange space opens, not loud, not dramatic, but deep enough for you to realize that you have lived too long inside stories you never truly examined. And in that space, you do not need to become someone else, fix yourself, or complete yourself. You only need to return to your rightful place, the one who sees, who experiences, who lives. You may still think, still worry, still have days when the mind becomes noisy, but this time, you know something you have never clearly seen before. All of that is happening within you, but it is not you. So this journey was never about becoming a better version of yourself. It is about stopping, letting go, and looking again to see that behind all those overlapping layers of thought, there has always been a part of you untouched. A part that does not need explanation, does not need proof, does not need to become anything else to have value. And perhaps true freedom is not found in controlling the mind, but in the moment you realize it no longer defines you. From there, life is no longer something you must think correctly before living. It becomes something you can step into directly, honestly, without needing any interpretation. And when you begin to live this way, you may discover something unexpected. What you have been searching for all along was never inside your thoughts.